to deal with the other aspects of the case that go into realms of the occult. I omitted them from the first blog and videos because I felt that I didn't want any skeptics to reject what I was saying and not actually hear the facts. So now I'm entering into that area which is quite hard to put into facts, but I'll try. Well, first of all, the mother came into the service. When she came into the service, she didn't behave like a normal crack cocaine user did behave. I'd worked with crack users for many years and worked with a couple of thousands of them really, and I'd learned that there was about 6 categories, whether I had distinguished 6 categories of which any crack user would fit into. But with this case, she didn't fit into any of them categories. She smoked hardly anything, and what she did smoke, like one rock, she couldn't complete. It was too much for her. She was seemed quite a manic person anyway, and yet she behaved like a person who was using 24/7, but she wasn't actually using hardly at all. She was very hyperactive, very manic, thoughts were erratic. In articulating what she needed to say, it came in pieces. It was like pieces of jigsaws were coming forward. There wasn't a constant flow. So to gather the information from her of what had happened was quite difficult because she would switch from one topic to another. And so it took me quite a while to gather what was going on. I was at that time writing a book on how to stop using crack, but it was with those 6 styles of users in mind. So now I knew I had to stop and learn because there was obviously a 7th type that I hadn't come across before. I had met this client before, a few years previous in '96, where I'd set up services for crack users to do weight training and was teaching their weights. She was a client of that service but wasn't a crack user then. She claimed she wasn't a crack user, yet I felt that she was and told staff, no, I believe she is, because her energy, when you work with so many crack users, in the end you learn to sense them, and that's what I was picking up, but she insisted to them she wasn't. And at a later stage when I asked her, she was honestly being honest at that time and saying that she wasn't using because she wasn't using, she was using pills at that time. But it's strange how her energy gave off that she was using. I had quite a lot of power up until that point with social services, in that if I asked for clients to receive certain services, that they went along with what I said. But in this situation, I experienced something completely different and a resistance that I had never come across before. I asked, as soon as the mother arrived and I assessed and found out who a social worker was, I straight away contacted that social worker and asked, could I arrange to have a meeting with her. This was stalled and didn't really happen, and it happened because, in the end, because the mother wasn't getting the contact with the child. So through arranging a meeting to see what was happening there, I got to meet the social worker that had been allocated. By that time, it was about 4 weeks after, and the mother had been clean all that time and was looking very healthy, very shiny. I pointed this out to the worker, and she said, yes, she does look a lot better, but there's no way we're ever going to give her the child back. The child's up for adoption, and we will never give the child back. So I said, no, we will fight you all the way for that then, because now the mother was recovering very well, and there was no reason not for the child not to be returned. Normally, social workers and guardian ad litem come and visit me and try to work a way forward for a client. But this time, no, in this case, no one came, no one asked, no one was interested in discussing a way forward. Therefore, after a year or so, I went to the chair of social services, who happened to be a guy who ran a community service in the borough, which had many children's services, and I had worked for him before running play schemes and so forth. And so I went to him and asked what he could do for me with this case, because I felt that it was just obstruction and no one was really wanting to return the child to the mother, and the mother was doing really well by this stage, and it didn't really make much sense. He said he had an appointment with social services that day, so he would go and sort it out, leave it with him, which I did. Following on from that, forms came through the post for the mother with pretty pictures on. I'd never seen forms like it. They were so nice at saying what did the mother want from the case conference and so forth. We attended the case conference and everyone was on good behaviour. Except when we introduced ourselves around the room, the social worker introduced herself and stated her name, it's quite an unusual name that she gave. But I had previously met the social worker by that name, and she was a lot younger, she was fitter, she was quite an attractive woman, where this one was fat and ugly and a lot older. So I pointed out, no, you can't be that person, but she just calmly said yes, she was her, and she changed her hair since then, and maybe that's what it was, is she changed her hair. I knew it wasn't anything to do with her hair, but just said, okay, yes, maybe you've changed your hair. At that case conference, no, they carried on just talking about adoption, really. But after the case conference, then the guardian ad litem did decide she would come and visit me. And she came and asked me various questions, but amongst them questions, she was asking me, who do you know in social services? So I informed her, yes, I knew the chair. And with that, she went away and shook my hand and left. Following on from that, I heard through the grapevine that the chair had been forced to leave. Well, he was given the choice between running the service that he'd set up from scratch, the community service, or stop being the chair of social services. So he chose to keep his service and stop being the chair of social services. Normally, I was considered a good worker, I think, by him, because whenever I'd asked for work in the past, he always gave me work. When my service was being, the sales and my training were dropping and I was losing money and needed work, I approached him for work and I didn't get a response from him, which was very unusual. So I assume it was to do with the case that he didn't wish to discuss it with me. The services then went back to obstructing the contact with the child and various other things. But contacts were arranged, and when they did happen, I attended many of them and videoed them and took photos and was just there to really witness that it all went well. On one of these occasions, a social worker that I'd previously trained in training around crack cocaine, I trained the teams for that borough, and on that occasion found that social worker to be quite a good social worker and carrying not much prejudice. And at a later stage, a client of mine did have that social worker, and I said, oh no, this one, she's fine, so you'll be okay. And everything did seem okay. But on this occasion, I said hello to her and remembered her name, but she said no, that wasn't her name no more, and she'd changed her name. She was okay at that contact, but I was explaining to her, oh, they're obstructing the mother getting the child, I don't know why. And she just stated, oh, if she's meant to have the child, she will have the child. Well, she got the child. The last contact where the child was being returned to the mother and it had to be done on a gradual process, the last contact at the nursery is when the child wet herself and the mother saw the vaginal area swollen and was discharged and so forth. She called over the social worker at that time to have a look at what she was witnessing, but in a later meeting, their notes from that day had disappeared, but social services didn't seem to be concerned with such things. Following on from that last contact, they went on to bring the child to the mother at home. On the last contact of where the child was with the mother at home with a social worker present, the child was jumping up and down on the bed, and the mother noticed the chain around her waist. She'd noticed the chain before when the child had been brought back from Ghana at the assessment that was done by the independent assessor, social worker, but didn't think anything of it at the time. But now she was jumping up and down on the bed, and she saw that the chain was rubbing her skin area. So she looked for the clasp to undo it, but she couldn't find the clasp. But she wasn't going to have that, so she broke the chain. The social worker present said, "Oh, I don't think you should be doing that," but she broke it. The child went into a trance as she did this, just staring. But then after that, she seemed quite free. So that was there. The chain, when I came the next day, she told me about what had happened, and I said, "Oh, let's go and put the chain somewhere because we might need it for some reason in the future." We put it outside in somewhere that was nature and in a container that had rainwater in it, just by fact it did. We're on the way to the place where we placed it. I had it in my pocket. I was feeling a flu come over me. But as I put the chain in the container with the water in, it instantly disappeared. So it was like I associated the chain with that was what was causing me to feel flu. The social services then arranged for a case meeting to be held at the mother's house. I hadn't heard of such a thing before, but okay, she went along with it. Just prior, like days prior to the meeting being held at her house, in a knickers drawer, she found a garlic, which was strange. So I came to her house. She said, "Oh, I found the garlic." I said, "Oh, we best look around the house for other things that may be there." In the cupboard in the hallway, we found an old curtain that had been in her previous home where she lived with another child of hers, and which was strange. And then in the bathroom cabinet, we found 2 old crack pipes that she used in the house that she had the curtain in previously. She hadn't had them pipes in the house, and it was strange. It's like someone put them there, maybe to mess up that meeting. But anyway, we removed the things from the house, and when she went and put the pipes in the bin out in the street, we drove away, and she put them in the bin in the street. As she put them in the bin, she felt a stabbing pain in her heart, really. Well, I'm just telling you the situation. I don't know why. It seemed that people were either trying to make her think about black magic or they were actually doing black magic. Regarding this, my knowledge was very limited. I had a case before of a client who was feeling she was under some sort of attack, and I went and explored what could be done about such things, but I didn't really learn it in no big detail. The child then was allowed unsupervised contact in the mother's home, but this was really messed with, and they gave the mother 1 sheet of dates and times to collect the child, and they gave the foster carer another set of dates. And when she did have the child, she'd have to go and collect her and then bring her to her home or out somewhere and then bring her back. On returning her, the child would scream and be pleading she didn't want to go back, but the mother had to say, "Okay, you will be with me soon, but you do have to go back." She told the guardian, well, I told the guardian ad litem that this was occurring, but the guardian just dismissed it and said, "Oh, I'd be surprised if the child doesn't have an attachment with the foster carer. She'd been with her for 3 years. Also, we noticed that there was a scar that appeared on the child's shoulder, like an old scar. We pointed it out to social services, and the social worker said that he did look at it. Well, he wrote in his report, he looked for it, but he couldn't find it. Soon after she came to live with the mother, it was very soon, because she was the mother was allowing her to settle into the home and sort of allowed her to do more or less what she wanted to do to find her way. And the mother was a singer, so there was a microphone there, and also the TV there. And the child seemed to be going from singing on the mic to watching the TV, and kept switching from one in one and then one in the other, and like only for a few minutes of each, as if she couldn't make up her mind what she wanted to do. But then after maybe 10-15 minutes of doing this, she just stood in the hallway and screamed. And after she screamed, a ball of, like a lump of jelly came out of her mouth onto the carpet, and it was like jelly and brown. Didn't really make much sense, but I'm letting you know that this happened. Also, when the mother did come sometimes to collect her and would take her to McDonald's, if she went into the toilets, then the child would somehow remember the chain that the mother had taken and ask, where's the chain? Then the mother said, oh, I put it somewhere safe. When it was the final time for the child to be returned, the carer was, with contempt really, said, oh, careful they don't take her back for being underweight. Well, she was on the right track there, because the child wouldn't eat. You had to feed her, and she was 3 years old. If you didn't feed her, she would just sit with the food, and it would take forever for her to eat. We'd ask her, do you not want the food? She'd say, no, I do want the food. So we'd leave her with the food. So it was a complicated situation, because we wanted her to mature and shouldn't really be feeding her at 3 years old, but at the same time, she seemed to be struggling to eat the food. And I had no idea why she took so long. Even years later, I discussed it with her and asked, what was happening there. And she says, I did want the food, I just couldn't eat it. I don't know why. I'd worked with children for many years as well as in the drugs field, and I've been a naughty child myself, so I sort of understood our naughty children tip. But this child wasn't really behaving like a naughty child, but she wouldn't do things. It was like she was very rude and hard to get to do things, really, anything. And what I found was, if you promised her a reward, then there was no way she was going to do things. It was as if a reward worked back to front. Punishment wouldn't work either. It might work a couple of times, and then it didn't work after that. So we found that the best thing to do was to ignore her. And if we ignore, not her like not giving her attention, but ignore what she was doing, ignore the fact that she was taking so long, and then that actually seemed to bring the results, although it required a hell of a lot of patience. Over time, she learned to push herself to do things. At nursery, when she wasn't nursery, and it was only for a short period of time because they cut her hair, she used to bring her art out, and the other children used to bring their art out, but she'd bring her out to take home. But the teacher would say, no, you can't take yours today. And mother really never thought much of it till we sort of learnt more later. At home, she was struggling with doing anything creative. You'd say, oh, here's a pen and paper, here's some colours. She didn't really do anything much. If she did do anything, she would draw rainbows, even if it was just in one colour, rainbows, snakes, and then what she called evil eyes in the belly, which were two black circles, quite big black circles, filled in. And they were the evil eyes in the belly. Never did quite understand what the evil eyes in the belly were. Other than that, she would scribble on the corner of a sheet of paper, maybe that big, and just do a little scribble and tear it off, and then tell you that's your receipt. Beyond that, not really any craft. A few months after she'd removed from the nursery, she did inform me that the daddies, which were the paedophiles she described, they taught her to call her, she had to call them the daddies. And so she referred to them as the daddies. And she said the daddies had been in the nursery and told her to stop drawing, and that's why she'd stopped drawing. So I went and got her 2 sheets of paper. It was like you draw all you like. Because of the hair and now cutting in the school and in the nursery, we had to home educate her. This was very hard. She found it very hard to concentrate. It's as if when she did try and concentrate, she'd go into some sort of trance. And so it took a lot of perseverance to teach her to read and to write. But now she's a bookworm. There's no stopping her. She fought against that occurring and managed to overcome it. The art, again, we persevered with, and in the end she was able to do patterns, and she liked creating patterns, very intricate patterns. But then I had to sort of educate her mind to understand that art, no one can judge art, because art is what you express, and no one can say, oh, it should be like this or it shouldn't be like this, because it's your expression. With that understanding, she developed and is quite good at art now. Education, when they came, they were always impressed with the level of her education. They always said she was very advanced and a very happy child. Their visits were rare. Strangely enough, we had the head of education for the borough and a head teacher, both quite elderly and very highly paid, I would think, to come and assess her, which is, how would you explain that? Because there was no difficulties with the child's learning, so why did we need such highly qualified professionals to come and see the children's work? Once I did say to them, oh, when I mark the work, I put little stars on them, and they were quite interested to know what sort of stars, because we see stars that you draw. So I showed them. They never asked about the cutting of the hair. I never was interested in that. And years later, the child as well told me that the head of education, she had recognised her from, in the nursery, she had been in a different borough, and she'd read some stories there. And I asked her, well, why didn't you tell me this before? But she said, yes, she wasn't able to, she don't know why. And that happened quite a lot, that things that she couldn't seem to tell me at the time, but at a later stage she was able to tell me, and she couldn't understand why she wasn't able to tell me at the time, but she knew that she knew at the time, but she couldn't say it. For a Christmas, I think it was the second Christmas, Mother bought her a doll. She had a doll previous to that when she was in care, which she seemed to really love. So we bought a doll very similar. But this doll she didn't treat nicely. She punched it in the face. She bit its foot, so it had a piece of foot missing. She would sit with it on her lap and put her hand up its t-shirt, or she would lay it on the bed with its t-shirt up and its knickers pulled down, obviously expressing what was happening, or had happened, sorry, to her. She had, when she was returned, she came with hardly any clothes, but a suitcase full of little teddy bears, little soft toys. But she didn't like them at all, so we just threw them away. And later she again expressed, no, she never liked dolls and she never liked teddy bears. Her behaviour, as I said before, was very rude and antisocial. But it depends, with other people it depended on who they were, because for some people she would be rude to and stare at and be quite nasty to, and others she'd be the perfect little angel. So different people knew her as a different character. Again, this behaviour we found had to be ignored, because else it would become worse if it was acknowledged. The mood swings also occurred where she could be happy and then all of a sudden she'd just be in a miserable mood and negative thinking and so forth. This was for no apparent reason that we could see, but I found that exercise helped. So we did a lot of walking, dancing, and they had trampoline in the garden, punch bags, swing ball, and singing helped as well. It helped it somehow as if you had to shift the energy. And she became very independent in the end and a very focused individual and knows herself very well. Other things that occurred in the case that I can't really understand, but I will tell you them, is when they were first moved to my home, the health visitor came to our house without invite, and so I came outside my door because someone had let her in downstairs and we lived upstairs. So I came outside my door, shut my door behind me, and she asked, is the mother there? I asked her to leave my home. I said she was trespassing and said, please leave. She continued to ask, although I continued to lead her down the stairs, saying that she was trespassing and could she please leave. Eventually she came outside the house and she gave me a note saying that she wanted to contact the mother. I took the note and bid her farewell. A few weeks later, following on from that, I was walking to the shops a few roads away from where we live and leading to the town, and I saw her along the road pushing a child in a pushchair, the health visitor, and then I passed her, carried on. Further along the road, on the high road, I looked behind me. She was still behind me. Then I carried on a fair pace, and there's only one road that leads to the supermarket. Got to the supermarket. I came in through the back entrance of the supermarket. As I came through, she was coming towards me in front of me. And in time-wise, it shouldn't be possible that she could do that. But there she was in front of me, without the child this time, and looking at me like to surprise me in a way, although I wasn't surprised because I'd seen strange things been going on for quite a while. The same sort of thing happened to the mother once she went to return the child to the carer, and then she walked away from the carer to the bus stop, which was down sort of the end of the road, and there's no other way to get to the bus stop, and when she got there, the carer was there at the bus stop with another child. So these things happen, but it's hard to explain why. When we'd go out sometimes, we'd see the social worker that was dealing with our case in like shops, but wouldn't be in the area where she was meant to be working. If we went really far away, like we went quite a lot to the seaside and nature places all over the country, we'd see people that weren't the same people, but they were looked like. They were like looky-likeys. They looked like the workers that were involved, but they wasn't them. So strange things. Many other things that are very hard to explain, but I will leave them out because it gets too complicated. Once I was in a pound shop with the little girl, and it was in another area, and all of a sudden I fell over backwards, and I don't normally do things like that. And as I got up, I looked to my side, and there was a woman there. I don't know, she might have been African, I don't know. And I looked at her and sort of smiled with embarrassment, really, of like, oh, stuff fell down. But she just looked at me with contempt as, yes. And I sort of could sense it was somehow she was responsible for me falling down, although I couldn't tell you how. And then as well, another time on the bus coming back from the same place, because of the gang stalking, we learned to just ignore people, really, that were sort of doing things a bit strange. And so I was sitting on the bus with the child next to me at the front, and then I had someone behind me, African again, with that sticks that they sort of use with tassels on, and she was sort of whacking, well, not whacking, but gently hitting it on the back of my chair, and sometimes it touched me, but I, again, just ignored her. Now, when it comes to the professionals that were involved in the case. I've worked for a long while, I'm a psychologist, and I feel quite good at detecting if someone's intents are not right. I can pick them up. But with these people, that's what puzzled me, is they seemed so sincere, and yet I knew their agenda wasn't sincere, but they appeared and came across sincere. It's legal, and I did film them with CCTV and dictaphone when they visited, because they would write in their reports one thing and be saying another thing at the home. So I felt to film them, and then I did at least have some sort of evidence. It did seem to deter them a lot from being worse than they were, and they were aware that the cameras were there, because when we'd leave the room, they'd point to them and signal that the mother's mad, or others would point to the cameras and so forth. When I analysed the videos, that's when I was able to see there was something quite peculiar, and that was that I'm a smiley person. I'll smile a lot, and it doesn't matter. I know that the agenda was bad, but I would still carry on smiling. And when I'd smile, they in a way are obliged to smile back. But it was as if they couldn't smile. Well, they did smile when it felt all natural at the time, but when I looked on the video, when they're smiling, then through that time they would quickly do this, and it'd be like a little smile. Their teeth would show, the sides would come up, and but it was very fast, that I wouldn't be seeing it with my eyes, but I would if I watched it on the videotape. Each of them showed this mannerism, and so I'm just letting you know here. Another time they brought in an African social worker just on one occasion for me, and she was like, they were asking about the child's education, and I was showing her, oh, this is her English workbook, and with that her eyes went yellow, and I've never seen anything like it in my life. And so I thought, oh, I said something that's excited you, I better shut up. So I did shut up. After they'd gone, then I asked the child, had she ever seen anyone's eyes go yellow? And she said, yes, she had seen their eyes go yellow many a time. One of the times, which I'll get to, is, as I said earlier, the child had this scar that appeared on her shoulder. And with this scar, what was also interesting is sometimes it was there and sometimes it wasn't. Sometimes it was very faint. Well, one occasion I asked her a few years later, oh, do you remember the scar that you had here? And she said, yes. And I said, do you know how you got that scar? And she explained that someone used a very sharp, she said it was a very sharp knife, and they put the knife into her shoulder, and then they circled her arm, and she demonstrated once, twice, and she said, oh, they circled it twice. And I said, oh, did they ever cut you anywhere else? And she said, yes, 2 times in the stomach. And sometimes it was African, sometimes it was a white guy also that did it. And she said on them occasions their eyes went yellow also. Well, that's what I've covered here today. I feel it is my responsibility to tell people what has gone on, and you can make your own minds up whether what you think about what I'm saying, but I feel that I should be telling you. So that's the end of the video on Occult. I've got one more left to do, which is on gang stalking aspects of it. Goodbye. What I want to talk about today is the gang stalking aspect of the case. Talking about the British paedophile ring that was running in the British care system, and as a result of the mother having the child returned to her, not only was occult practices being used against her, but also included in that, seems intrinsic with the occult practice that go on, was gang stalking, which maybe some people are not familiar with because it tends to be separated from occult practices, but really they seem to work together. Another name for it is targeted individuals. In that sense, yes, we were targeted individuals in that all our correspondence was interfered with. When we moved house, all the bills were problematic. So you would tell them our names, but they'd come back with the wrong name on, so we'd need to do it again and repeat the process of simple practices. Registration of things also the same. And this wasn't just like, oh, okay, just the water bill. It was every bill. So the electric bill, the gas bill, the rent, every aspect, benefits, every aspect was interfered with. The phones, as I say, were tapped. My phones were tapped since 1996, made clear to me, and they continued to be tapped and again interfered with, so the messages wouldn't come, or people would claim they never got the messages. And I suppose it's all to do with making you aware that you are being watched, to make you into sort of an anxious state, maybe a paranoid state. With regards to the gang stalking, it seems to be that natural things that would normally occur are used. So it might be like that you go out and everywhere you go, people are doing the same cough, so they may go and the next person you see will go the same. And if you try to explain that to someone in general public, they would think they know that's just normal, that's, you know, people coughing. You need to see that it's done repeatedly, so it's natural things that occur, but it's unnatural that it's happening everywhere. So if you walk to the shops and back, it would happen constantly on the way. I've later since found out that people, yes, are paid to actually go and do this, and they are gang stalkers. The purpose of it, I suppose, is again to show we're around, and as well, when you keep having something repeatedly done, like the coughing, in the end, if someone does naturally cough, you still think that's part of it, and you become hyper aware of the coughing going on, or sneezing, or just simple gestures that people could dismiss. But if you tried to express it, you would look paranoid. It's like it's a strategy that they repeat something until you notice it. So, in a sense, you could say, right, okay, well, as soon as you notice it, let them know, but then they would do something new once you notice it. But then that antic is, therefore, you're expecting to see it in life, and when it does occur, even naturally, you will associate it with the harassment. Now, normally when this happens, I've since learned that it happens to people when they're on their own. And I suppose it's done to isolated people and to keep them isolated. Because of this happening and because of all the other aspects that were happening in our life, we tend to be together most of the time. But on certain occasions, we would be separate. When this was the case, then say if I went out and she was alone in the house, then for certain, always someone would be knocking, whether it was Jehovah's Witness or the electrics man to read the meter, but someone would knock. Not with no big issues, just to show that, yes, we've recognised that Louise has gone out. If the mother went out, then again she would have the coughing, the sneezing, whatever antics that was being used, and it'd be the same one used constantly all that time, and then they may change it to a different one. This was never done in front of me, so if she was to express it, a normal person would be told, no, that's not the case, but because I worked so closely with her, I was aware that, no, she was expressing something that was really going on. Also, if she was to get on a bus, people would come and talk to her on the bus, and she was quite a sociable person, and when they spoke to her, gradually they would let it gradually be known that they're involved in the same thing. And so it was to sort of, I think, stop the sociability of the person. Also this sort of not only included all the statutory services, as we've already I've told you in previous videos I've made, but also it included the emergency services. And I'll give you an example. Is once, New Year's Eve, I just popped out, and then she said that the ambulance service arrived and knocked at the door and said, "Oh, ambulance," and she said, "No, no one requires an ambulance here," but she didn't open the door, and they said, "Oh, you know, that someone has called the ambulance." Again, she was on her own. Another time, I don't know how it was meant to be, but she popped out and the fire brigade knocked, and we'd moved premises and we didn't have landlines because there's so much interference, there was no point. And the fire brigade turned up with sirens blaring and knocked and said, "Oh, that there'd been reports that the house was on fire, and they'd traced the call to our house." So I said, "No, we don't have a landline, so I don't quite know how you traced the call to our house." And they asked, could they come in and verify that we didn't have a landline? So I said, yes, you could. So again, it's like, I reminded them, you know, someone's house is on fire. Another time, we just drove to the shop locally, and we'd only gone about 5 minutes. I went to the shop, and when I come out, the police were lined up with my car and speaking to the mother. And I come along and asked her, you know, what was the problem? And they said, oh, they'd had a call that the mother was looking distressed in the car, so they come to see if she was okay. So that was very nice of them, very fast service, and kept repeating, "Are you sure you're not distressed? You sure you're not distressed?" She wasn't distressed. So again, it's to show, yes, we're everywhere and in everything that you do. After a few years, because this went on and on and on for years and years, they brought in youths and children to also be part of the gang stalking. And again, when she was out on her own, they'd call her names and throw stones at her. And the thing is, she's a black woman, and we was in a white suburban area where really, in truth, racism holds that, oh, the white people are a bit wary of black people. But it didn't seem to have a problem for these youths. They still continued to sort of throw things at her. She went to another area with another friend of mine, as a black friend, and there they threw snowballs at her. My friend couldn't believe, because they both looked like women that you don't really want to mess with, but there you go, they were throwing snowballs at them. Another aspect of this that I haven't really got into, but I will in the future, is the mother is actually a professional singer and had music in the charts and done a few world tours. She therefore needed to practice. Okay, she wasn't singing at that time, wasn't able to with all this harassment going on, but she needed to practice every day to keep her vocal cords stretched and so forth. But this was made into an issue by the neighbours, because as well the neighbours were part of the harassment. It seemed they were nice to me, very nice to me, and quite rude to her, but in front of me they wouldn't be rude to her. And once she'd pointed that out to me, then I sort of started to ignore them, because I thought, well, if you can be rude to her and not to me, I don't really want no part of that. But they continued to be nice to me even though I ignored them. Now this issue of her needing to practice singing escalated to the point where the neighbours complained about her singing and the noise. And yes, she has a large vocal sound, but obviously she needs to practice. In the day she had practiced. So it escalated to the point where they complained, and they complained to Environmental Health. Environmental Health came round and said that they would take the equipment away. I don't quite know how they'd take the equipment away, but they said they would. She still continued singing because she knew this was her profession. She was being harassed outside, so to stay in, she wanted to continue doing her singing. So then letters came threatening that she would receive an ASBO if she didn't stop singing. She continued singing. And they never did actually bring the ASBO forward, but like in all of this case, there was threats always of legal implications, but they never were followed through. One day she was singing downstairs, and I came downstairs. As I say, things weren't really done in front of me, and she was singing, and I saw that children were throwing stones at our living room window. So I opened the window and asked them, excuse me, what do you think you're doing? And they said, oh, she's mad, isn't she? And look at her. And I said, what are you talking about? And they said, well, she sings all the time. And I said, well, that's because she's a singer. Anyway, they backed off because I was in, and then a few days later I walked down the road from the shops and I saw the youth. They were only children, like maybe 10 to 12-year-olds, and they used to hang around outside the house a few doors away, but then harass the mother when she was singing. So I spoke to them and I asked them, you know, what was the problem, and they said, well, you know, it's her singing. And I said, well, you know, singing's good though, isn't it? And so they said, no. So I said, well, she has had chart records, so someone must like the tune. But they didn't really want to entertain that. So I focused more on them and said, you know, what would they like to do with their life? And they said they wanted to be footballers. But there they were, smoking their cigarettes. So I said to them, no, that wouldn't really help them, and maybe they shouldn't be there, but practicing their football so that they could become what they wanted to be. After that occasion, because I thought best to make friends with these youth, whenever they saw me, they'd run away. So they were scared of my niceness for some reason. There was also helicopters every night. You'd hear helicopters. You could say, well, you know, helicopters do go over. But every night we'd hear the helicopters, I'd just like to point out. And also we'd hear gunshots every night. And we lived in suburbia, and this is England, so we don't tend to have guns. But we'd hear them every night. And then in around 2007, I managed to get onto the internet. And then I saw a video on YouTube that was calling it gang stalking, and it was like, oh, I recognise that, but I could see that people have problems trying to express what it is because it's just natural things that could be dismissed as just normal. I believe the purpose of it is to isolate the person and to get them to stay in their house, and then once in their house is to suffocate their spirit, really. Stay in your house and shut up. I didn't receive any of this sort of harassment, only the phone interception and the mail interception. But I came to learn through time that there was a thing called trauma-based mind control. And what I learned was that the mother was from that experience. She was mind-controlled MK Ultra that people may be familiar with, and so was the child, being trained for that when we got her back from care. I learned later. And therefore the antics that the people were doing in the streets were actually triggers that were used whilst trauma was being carried out in the past. They repeated the same antic again and again during a trauma, and therefore at a later stage, like now, when I suppose the slave is moving away, they activate the emotion by keep doing the same trigger signal. There was no point doing that to me because I'm not MK Ultra slave. This is where we're at. Also recently, so I will go on to the mind control aspect of things, but in the next video. Also recently, when I was looking in my car, or sweeping my car, I went into where the seatbelt slots into the pocket when it's folded away, and I was sweeping away a little bit of glass from a few years ago when someone smashed into the window of the car, and I found a listening device. I'll show you. It was hidden in the seatbelt holder, and I wouldn't have normally found it. I don't know how long it was there, but little bits of glass were on the carpet, so I think it was recently placed in. This is the device. I don't know if you can see. Some people say it looks like a button, but I have spoken to other people that know about such things, and they say it looks like a hearing aid piece. Apparently the battery is that large, so it lasts as long. It had a wire sticking out from it, and it's magnetic, so it was holding on to the side of the car in that department. So obviously they still want to listen to me, even though this case, in a sense, ended 2006, but obviously hasn't. So that's the gang stalking aspect dealt with now. Thank you for listening. Goodbye. Today I'd like to explain how I came to understand there was mind control going on within the British care system, and how we attempted to deprogram this out. What we do see is that there's a cover-up of so many paedophiles, so many paedophile rings at the top that are just being pushed to the side and covered over, families that are involved in paedophilia, and again, cover-up occurring. And what happens is I end up questioning, well, why do they need so many children? How many nonces are there out there? Throughout the care system, children are expressing again and again that they're being abused, and their voices are just falling on deaf ears. I don't know how many children they do need, but in my journey to help revoke the care order held by the local social services of the child for the mother, I came across what had been going on with the mind control. What I did see was that the mother was treated in a way that I hadn't witnessed before, and I'd worked for many years with the borough, with all types of clients, but I'd never seen hatred like I saw demonstrated by all professionals towards this mother. Their behaviour was very cold, very hostile, very arrogant, ridiculing really her, me, the system. It didn't really, nothing really seemed to bother them. Even in the court case fighting for the child, the social worker never turned up, and the judge subpoenaed her to attend. She still didn't attend, and it didn't seem to come to anything. I also, through the case, went to people in positions of power and saw how they buckled under the powers that be, and some turned from being very caring professionals to very cold professionals in front of my eyes. Eventually, yes, the care order was revoked and the child was returned, but in that process I had to be willing to sacrifice my career and many of my human rights, because they were demonstrating to me throughout the case that really, I suppose, that they were wanting me to drop the case, or this consequence was gradually happening. Everything they do is systematically, and so it's all done gradual, that's showing you, yes, this will happen. The child was returned, and when the child was returned, she was very strange. She wasn't really behaving like a normal child. I'd worked in play schemes for many years with all different types of children. I was a very naughty child myself, but this child was different, and I hadn't actually witnessed any child like her before. She was extremely unmanageable, extremely rude. If you took her in public, then she would just stare at people, and they could smile back at her and be friendly, but she'd carry on staring at them. When it comes to play, she didn't seem to have the ability. She would destroy the toys that you gave her, and when we gave her dolls, she would actually do all types of abuse towards the dolls, acting out obviously what she'd been shown before. If you gave her paper to draw on, she would draw a little scribble in the corner and then tear that corner off and then give you it and say, here you go, there's your receipt. She was about 3 years old when she was returned. When it comes to drawing, the only things that she really did draw other than these receipts was she'd draw a line and she'd say that's a snake, she'd draw rainbows, and also she'd draw what she called evil eyes in the belly, which I never quite understood what she meant by it, but they were two big circles, black, filled in, and she would say they're the evil eyes in the belly. She is a black child, and was fostered to an African foster carer, and yet maybe you could say, oh, this is prejudice, but she had no sense of rhythm. When she was returned, she couldn't dance. And I mean, her mother is a professional singer, and I remember at one contact the mother singing to her, and the child staring in awe of like, wow, like she'd never heard singing before. And yes, when she returned, she didn't really know any music, any songs. The only song she did know was Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, How I Wonder What You Are. Yes, I'm just finding my way through. When it comes to speech, sometimes she had very limited speech, and yet on other occasions she could talk constantly, although she would talk a load of rubbish that would be very irritating, but we would listen to the rubbish because it seemed to help calm her down. And then other times she'd talk like a wise old woman full of wisdom, but it was like an old woman speaking. If you asked her direct questions regarding anything, she would seize up. So you had to not ask questions directly to find answers. The abusers, she called them the daddies. They told her to call her the daddies, apparently. And there was also the mummies. And both abused her. And she said that the daddies came into the nursery. When she'd been returned, she was placed in nursery for a short period of time, till they cut her hair and nails. But she said that the daddies came in the nursery and told her to stop drawing. As well, when the mother used to walk her to the nursery in the morning, there used to be guys sitting in the cars outside, and they would say hello in a tone that sounded like they knew the child. So I assume they were the daddies, and I assume there was no problem for them getting into the nursery. The foster carer did say on the return of the child, careful they don't take her back for being underweight. And she wasn't really underweight when she was returned. She was really underweight when she came back from Africa, but at the point of her return, she wasn't severely underweight. But on her return, it was extremely hard to get her to eat anything. It was like she'd sit with the food, but she wouldn't want to. You'd have to feed her. But it was becoming a conflict because as she was getting older, it was like, well, really, you should be feeding yourself. She'd only sleep for about 4 hours a day in the night, and then she'd be jumping around all night to begin with till she sort of learned to behave with that bit. As I say, she gradually disclosed what had happened to her in foster care, and also that she was told by the daddies she had a different name. Well, it wasn't actually how it came about. Was once she came and called herself by a different name, and her mother said, "No, your name is so and so." And then later years, I asked her, "You called yourself so and so. What was that about?" And she said, "You can't possibly expect me to remember all that far back." I mean, she was 6 when she was saying this. And I said, "Well, yes, I do." And she said, "Oh, okay. Well, the daddies told me that when I'm with them that I must be answerable to that name." So she had a different name for when she's with them. I asked her as well, like while she was in care, was anybody nice to her ever? And she said no one was ever nice to her. If they were nice, they were only nice for a short period of time, and then they turned nasty. And also, she added that, yes, the children were nice. She described abuse by white people, black people, Asian people, and also she described some sort of rituals being done with knives on her by a range of races. Due to my ignorance on mind control, and I think most of us have got ignorance around mind control actually going on in the world, but it's only starting to come out now. I couldn't understand her behaviour. I just saw it as very bizarre and tried really hard to make sense of it. Because they were using lots of occult don't know the word to use, but they were doing different occult antics around us. I suppose one was led to look down that road, which I knew very little about. I did have some friends that I asked, and I read some books from the local library. Previously, a few years prior to this, I did have a client that said she was being attacked by people that were using obeah, and I went to my previous boss and asked him about it, and he taught me somewhat on it, and he said that 95% of it was the mind, and 5% was real. But it wasn't really adding up, because it seemed like 95% was real, and only 5% could be explained by the mind from what we were seeing going on. Through trial and error, really, therefore, we found ways to manage the child. And after about 5 years, I came across a book in the library by David Icke. And in that, it explained about mind control somewhat. This started to make more sense. It was there was a book written by a woman called Kathy O'Brien called Transformation of America. And so I proceeded to go and get the book, which was quite hard to get. It's not available it wasn't available in the shops then. On reading the book, then yes, things started to make much more sense, because she spoke of different authors, different personalities in a sense within a person, and this started to make sense of the child, because she did have different personalities, some old, some young, some couldn't really speak, others could, some had different accents, some spoke in different languages. And through that, it helped to understand what was happening more. I wrote to Kathy O'Brien to explain our situation, because I didn't know anyone else in the world that was in that position. And she said to not take on the occult aspects of it, because it doesn't really work. But then later, which was difficult to sort of take from her, because everything was appearing like it was to do with occult practices. But then later I found Fritz Springmere, and he's saying unless you take out the demon from the altar, you won't actually be able to totally deprogram. So this was causing a conflict of which to follow, because they can't both be right. Reading it was a generational thing. We then realised that it was possible the mother was also gone through some form of mind control in the past. And so we started applying the deprogramming techniques learnt from Kathy O'Brien to the mother, which was writing out, in a sense, the memory, and then gradually more memory comes forward, is what we found. In school, she was called by a different name, which was quite strange, because her name isn't difficult to say, but this is what she was told was, oh, it's difficult to say, difficult to remember. So they called her by a different name, to the point that even the teachers called her by it. And when she left school at 16, the teacher said he couldn't write a reference with her real name on it, because he'd got so used to calling her the other name, which is a bit strange, because the register surely had her real name on it. But this name that they gave her in school actually appeared again, because as she's a musician, and we was finding it very difficult to get back into the music industry, didn't actually know why, and people said use MySpace. So we did look on MySpace, and we found that someone was already claiming to be her when we got there. But we wrote to that person, because they were white, apparently, and said, you're not actually her, and this is her profile if you'd like to join. And then they changed their name from her name to the name that they used at school. So, yes, the other name is an important issue. And what we've learned from mind control is, yes, various names are used for different authors. The mother around this time was experiencing many ailments, and the gang stalking was going on too. And so we thought, well, maybe some of these ailments are to do with programs, so it's worth looking and trying to deprogram them out. She started with hives. She had this rash all over her skin. It was like dry patches, and we diagnosed it as hives, and was buying antihistamine tablets, which was helping to keep it down. In one of the footnotes in Kathy O'Brien's book, it said how they use histamine in their programming. So it was worth looking into. She deprogrammed it out and found that she'd been left in a field when she was at school, primary school in England, London, and she had eyes that were so puffy, she remembered, but they left her in the field with the hay fever. And more to that program, but once she'd deprogrammed out the memory of this, the skin irritation stopped and there was no more need for the antihistamine. And so we realised that this could be applied to many of the ailments, and yes, each ailment that she looked at disappeared once she'd remembered what was associated with that ailment, it seems. Many of these ailments she wasn't really experiencing before the child return, so I don't actually know whether the child return was triggering it or whether the gang stalking was triggering it, or just the stress of the life that we were being put under was triggering it. But quickly the ailments were removed. With regards to the child, I tried to teach her to deprogram, but she had problems with writing. Whenever she wrote, she would go into a trance. So she did her best. She did try, but she wasn't really able to deal with the trancing. But over time, and as she aged, I suppose, she did get stronger at fighting against the trancing. I wrote back to Kathy O'Brien on this matter, and she said, yes, the child would be okay. Come puberty, she felt she would be able to address the deprogramming more then. And yes, when she got to about 10, 11, then she was more able to focus on deprogramming, and by that time I'd learned a number of techniques that were able to give to her to help her deprogram out more of her memory. And she became a much stronger person, fighting against any trancing. And also what we found was exercise helped. She may have been in a real stubborn, horrible mood, really, but if we got her to do exercise, run, play on the swing ball, punch bag was very good. It seemed that she changed from being angry inside to being more happy, and it seemed to release or change something. So we found that very helpful. As time went on as well, she was able to disclose more that, like, for example, the head teacher that we used to have come and visit our house to assess her educational achievement, she years later realised that, or remembered or told me that this was the teacher that was actually in the nursery that used to come in another borough to read her a story. And there I asked, well, why didn't you tell me this before? This is years later. But she said there's many things she couldn't say before. It was as if she wasn't able to say, but as time went on, she was able to say this. Also, she became aware of the effects of colours and logos were having on her moods and affecting what authors were there. Her memory is extremely good, like goes way back. And therefore, she's able to apply the deprogramming techniques, but they have to be done at her pace. And anyone who's deprogramming, that needs to be done at their pace. So what I'm trying to say is not only is we can see that the British care system is taking children unfairly a lot of the time away from their families into abusive situations. There's actually a structure, I believe, in place to create mind-controlled slaves to use for whatever they wish to use them for. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.